I'm Sabrina Man and the founder of the Sustainable Alpine Tourism Initiative. So a bit of background behind SATI that might be helpful for you to all know. So I started the project as a result of my research on circular economy whilst I was doing a master's at Cambridge University. And I noticed there was a real gap on sharing knowledge about sustainability across Alpine regions, but more generally, the different sectors that make up those regions. So looking at infrastructure, the outdoor industry, and tourism. And I think from my perspective over the last year, we've really, through the SATI dialogue so far, tried to build those bridges across the sectors and get people to collaborate a lot more, because I think often the issues that we all face are quite similar in terms of sustainability challenges. And I'm delighted today that we can discuss this in the energy and materials space with some of the world's leading innovators on this. So a bit of background behind our panel, and really welcome all of our panelists, and thank you all for joining today. So we've got Nikolas Fleischhacker, and he is the co-founder and scientific director of the Green Energy Centre of Europe, and he's based in Austria. We've also got Anselma Wörner, who's the co-founder of Exnaton, and she's really a pioneer on community energy and connected grids, and she'll be talking a little bit about some of the projects that she's done in that space in Switzerland. We have, very excitingly, a fantastic team from a school in Innsbruck who just won a prize from the EU Youth.shaping Alpine strategy team. And they're completely pioneering biochar in the local community. And I think that's going to be great to hear from a voice of a younger generation as well, which is really important, I think, in this current time. We have Sabrina Viitasaari, who's dialing in from Finland. And Sabrina is really at the forefront of circular economy across different industries. She's the co-founder of a startup called New Cycle that's looking at how to do waste offsets, and she'll be explaining a bit more about what that is and also what it means for different companies' waste streams. In terms of our facilitators for today, great pleasure to welcome Maria Kuzma. So she's a pro snowboarder. She's also a professional architect. She's also currently creating actually the world's first all-female snowboard film. So for anyone interested in that aspect, please also reach out to Maria. And finally, Josine Bacchus, last but not least, who is an innovation expert. And Josine was really quite at the forefront of a lot of the virus responses that we saw during the pandemic in terms of instigating the hackathons and many of those collaborations between different startups and corporates and communities that we saw as a response to the coronavirus. So great to welcome all of our panelists here today, and we'll be hearing from each of them about different levers in terms of energy and materials. And the way that the session will work today is we'll have a 45-minute panel, after which you're all welcome to ask questions, and I'd encourage you to do that throughout the event. Please do put questions in the chat function, and we'll be having time for that Q&A after the panel, after which we will move at around, so that's 12:45 UK time, 1:45 Central European time, to breakout rooms, which are facilitated by myself, Maria and Josine. And the purpose of those is to get a much more in-depth discussion with each of you around some of the different levers that we're looking at in this space, and also addressing the challenges and how we can overcome those through sharing knowledge, really. So just to kick off, I wanted to give a very quick overview of some of the key themes that we saw from SATI 2020. I think there's a report that I created, and again, with the QR codes, feel free to scan this QR code that you see. The idea behind this was really to do consolidation of the key highlights of what we're seeing in the space. So I think from my perspective, this really looked at 4 key themes: tourism 2.0, and that is trying to understand, as a result of the coronavirus crisis, how can tourism really redefine itself and actually rebuild in a much more sustainable way that is looking at both economic and environmental resiliency. And there's lots of great examples, hopefully, in that report for you to tap into and learn about there. We've also got a big emphasis on circular economy and why it's important that we go to change from slightly linear models of production and of resource use to circular production. And I think there's a great myriad of speakers and experts that are involved in the SATI project that you could be able to connect with and share on that. We've also got a big emphasis on looking at how to decarbonize infrastructure and why it is that certain levers are important to address in looking at that this year in particular, as we look at COP26. I think often the energy discussion is potentially quite siloed in terms of some of the narratives. And one of the things we tried to do last year was bring finance into that discussion, because actually finance, and sustainable finance in particular, is a very strong lever to look at decarbonisation, but is relevant for lots of different industries as well. And it's something that's quite new when it comes to Alpine regions in particular. And finally, communities, I think, is really, really important. So you'll see today actually that we've got quite a few speakers that are very much leading on the community dialogue around sustainability innovation. And I think they've got some amazing examples of different initiatives that they're doing in this space. And again, I'd encourage you to connect with them. So yeah, if you haven't seen that report, please do feel free to download that, and do get in touch with me as well. My LinkedIn contact is at the side, and I'd love to hear from anybody about feedback or thoughts that you have in that space, because I think together connecting on this is a much stronger discussion than remaining in various silos. So this brings me brilliantly onto Nikolas. So Nikolas, as I mentioned, is looking at the development of energy systems in Europe. And just for background, his organization is actually involved in trying to understand how different types of energy innovations are going to be impacting certain sectors. So one of the great projects that Nikolas has done is look at the use of hydrogen in the Alpine mobility infrastructure space. And I know, Nikolas, that was on the back of a coalition that you've developed in terms of the Green Energy Centre for Europe. So I wanted to ask you today, in terms of the energy system and some of those innovations that you're discussing with the different stakeholders, whether it be energy companies, governments, energy users in terms of the manufacturers of the technology and the industry players, how do you really see the reconstruction and redesign of the energy system in Alpine regions, including, for example, harnessing hydrogen energy and hydrogen solutions?
Thank you. Well, here in Austria, and especially in Western Austria and in Tirol, we follow an energy strategy which was implemented more than 10 years ago by my father. It's called Tirol 2050 Energy Autonomous. And basically these three words already say what we are trying to accomplish. So Tirol, this region, wants to get energy autonomous, which is not, which means that we want to make best use of our own resources and build on them to fulfill our energy needs. And in this reconstruction of the energy system, we can see back on an exponential growth of the energy demand with only little drops, for example, during the energy crisis or the oil crisis. And now we are on a really high level of the energy demand for industry, tourism, and also private energy consumptions. And based on this high level, we now foresee to drop our energy demand by 50% until 2050, but only using less energy is not enough. We also have to increase the use of our own resources, and here in this region of the Alps, the main resource is actually water and of course electricity from water. And besides that, we only can use the sun, which is our second main resource we have here in the Alps regarding energy. And by reducing our energy demand and on the other hand also implementing new energy sources using hydropower and also photovoltaics, we want to get energy autonomous by 2050. As you can see, this reconstruction of the energy system is really, or the idea is really to reconstruct it towards electric energy. So we are rebuilding the energy system and we are switching everything to electricity. And why is that? Because with electricity you can do everything. You can power mobility. You can heat your house using a heat pump, and that's very efficient. You can power industry. So any other energy form is really can be easily transformed using electricity. There is just one real catch about electricity, and that's the English term is power on demand. It always has to be generated as it's used. And that's one main disadvantage of this form. So always when we plug in any electric device, on the other side, some power plant has to switch on and deliver this power needed for our electric device. And especially when we then think on electromobility and stuff, we have much higher demands that are needed. And so that's why we also, besides the direct use of electricity based in this power on demand approach, we also introduced a power to gas, or to be more precise, a power to hydrogen approach, where we then can store electric energy over long times, and where we also can store huge amounts of electric energy. So to say surplus electric energy is then chemically bound in hydrogen by splitting water, H2O, into hydrogen, H2 and O2. And then this hydrogen can be stored and used at any time for other purposes, and especially for heavy duty mobility. And within this mindset, we also developed or set up a project called High Snow Groomer, where we are developing the world's first hydrogen electric snow groomer. So yeah, we are using this hydrogen to power everything where heavy loads have to be transported over long distances, and short refueling is needed. And in regards to tourism, it's our goal to also say, okay, we need lots of oil and stuff for technical purposes, for snow groomers and so on. And we also want to switch these heavy duty applications to the use of our own resource, water, sun, electricity and hydrogen.
That's fantastic. And I think for a lot of people on this call today, I think they might have heard elements of how hydrogen is useful, but I think in what you've said, there's a very clear direction of how translating the renewable strategy into a hydrogen strategy, and then using that to decarbonize quite heavy industries and processes which currently are quite fossil fuel heavy, is a really interesting value proposition that hasn't necessarily been explored across many regions in the Alps. I know that your team is definitely a forefront of that in terms of the snow groomer, and we're seeing some emergent technologies in the train industry as well. I think Austria actually had one of the first hydrogen trains, and I know they're looking at this in the UK. But I think what's great in everything that you've said is it starts with a very simple concept of the fact that we can actually reinvent some of those energy processes to try and scale up the decarbonisation. And I think that's something that's so critical as we look to how we can decarbonize quite heavy industries in particular, whether it be steel that's used for actually manufacturing some of those infrastructure that we see on a mountain, or like you said, whether it's the mobility infrastructure. Because for those of you not aware, in many resorts, the emissions of those groomers is quite high. I think sometimes it can be responsible for up to 90% of emissions on a mountain in terms of the groomer. So I think the technology that you're developing, Nikolas, is really at the forefront of addressing some of those issues, and thank you so much for sharing that with us today. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions for Nikolas, please do put that in the chat function, and we'll be taking those questions in around half an hour or so. And this brings me really nicely onto Anselma, actually, because I think one thing that's quite interesting in this discussion around energy is the decentralization of energy in terms of communities actually being able to engage on a discussion around energy security, energy affordability, clean energy. And I know, Anselma, in the project that you've done in Switzerland with Quartierstrom, I think that was really an incredible example of how communities can actually take advantage of connected grids and try to implement a scale up of renewable energy at a local level. So I wondered if you could explain for those of the audience that have not heard of this project or are not aware, a bit more about how this project worked, what are connected local energy systems in terms of a community level, and crucially, how do you think this approach can really be implemented across different regions in the Alps? Because the project that you did, I think, was in Switzerland, and we've got people dialed in from France, from Finland, from Germany and Austria, and lots of regions in the Alps that might be able to learn from your approach that you've implemented.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to say a few words about the project and what we're doing now with the startup. But first of all, thanks for the invitation for today and for organizing this event. I think, yeah, the topic is very important at the moment for all kinds of regions. So I'm obviously happy to talk about our approach. So in my personal background is I did a PhD at ETH Zurich together with my two co-founders today. And we worked on a large research project there, which was called Quartierstrom, as you just mentioned. So that's German for district power. And what we built there was really one of the first peer-to-peer local energy markets worldwide. So we had this project set up in a small town in Switzerland, and 40 households there were really able to buy solar electricity from their neighbor's rooftop at a price they could also influence themselves. So every household could check their app, see if there was renewable energy available and say, oh, I'd be willing to pay my normal electricity tariff or even a little bit more if I get the renewable energy. Or they could just, you know, sign up for a longer period of time and just say, yeah, I want to be part of this. Whenever there is local renewable electricity available, I would like to buy this from the local producers. And this way, although you don't change physical energy flows, what we found in this project is that you really create a much higher level of interest and engagement on the consumer side for renewable energy and for the energy system as a whole. And this is really something that we have learned also in our previous research, that it's really important to get this kind of consumer engagement in the first place, because otherwise we can build, you know, all types of new technologies and, you know, great generators and so on. But if nobody buys them and if nobody, you know, really understands that in order to move to renewable energy, we also need to change our consumption patterns, then, you know, all the technology will be for nothing, because you still need to apply it and you need to use it. And so what we took away from this research project, from the Quartierstrom project, was really, you know, we need a scalable software that also, you know, gets the consumer on board and makes renewable energy more understandable. And so that's why we decided to found the startup Exnaton. We are an ETH spin-off today. We basically use the technology as an example that we tested in the prototype, but now really build a scalable software product which we offer to energy providers in Europe. So at the moment we already have first customers in Switzerland and in Austria, actually, where we offer energy communities. An energy community can be between 30 and, you know, 1,000 households that, you know, share renewable resources, buy from local resources, and then also see where the energy comes from and how they could actually contribute to save more CO2 emissions and to use more renewable energy rather than just electricity from larger power plants. Yeah, and we are obviously looking to expand to other countries in the future as well, because I mean, this technology and this approach is not limited to Switzerland or Austria by any means. It could be used in any kind of region where there is local renewable generation like solar, but also small water power plants or wind power. And then, you know, different households can contribute to investments in these renewable generators, which I think is definitely a direction we need to move in. And we also get a lot of regulatory support for this type of approach.
That's amazing. I think in everything that you've said, it resonates really strongly in a lot of the discussions that I have with communities in different regions. So interestingly that you said about that users and consumers have to feel the accessibility of that energy solution. I think one thing that was really apparent when I discussed this with hotels for my own research was that I think the initial cost of the implementation seemed like it was quite out of reach of them. And then when they have a community energy grid, I think the affordability of that solution changes quite a lot. And like you said, the data to measure that is so critical, because it means that they're actually able to understand what the economic benefit of switching is as well, and crucially how it's a roadmap of affordable energy, which they may not necessarily have had access to should that capex have been purely for themselves to implement. And I think the policy point that you mentioned is so crucial. I think often in the discussions that we have, we kind of maybe have discussions on the policy perspective and on the industry perspective, but I think when it comes to energy, bringing those two together is so critical, partly because there's obviously a government strategy around energy, but I think the three together that you've implemented in terms of industry, policy and community is so powerful. And I know you mentioned that obviously the technology is applicable to other countries, and I know we've got a lot of people from France actually on this call today, and so it would be great in the breakout sessions to be able to connect with some of the other regions and discuss, you know, what are the pain points around doing that and how can we try to overcome that in terms of learnings.
Yeah, happy to discuss.
Amazing. And like I said, please do connect with Anselma. The QR code for her LinkedIn is there, and I'd encourage you all to definitely connect across and share your perspectives, which brings me really nicely actually onto the team from the school in Virgil. So interestingly, in my own research, I found that intergenerational learning was very important as a driver to actually get very bottom-up innovation in terms of sustainability across lots of different regions, and there's multiple reasons for that, one of which is the fact that a lot of businesses in Alpine regions are run by families, and therefore there is quite a big intergenerational factor that plays into the role of sustainability in terms of a company strategy or an SME strategy or even a large corporate strategy. But one thing that is very often missing from the discussions I find in sustainability is the voice of the younger generation. I think I've been really lucky throughout my career, actually, especially in my work at BNP Paribas, that there's been a real kind of openness to actually share ideas across the generations. And I think I really wanted to, when I developed SATI, give young people a space and a voice to actually share their experience as well. I think there's lots of programs out there that we're involved in outside of SATI, like Josine, for example, is part of the One Young World team as an ambassador, me myself too. But I think in SATI, I wanted to give quite a lot of opportunity for young people that are at the forefront of some of these solutions to actually share their experience of that. And I'm delighted today to welcome both Sophia and Max, and they are based at a school in Virgil, which is in Austria, in the Tirol region, and they are an amazing group of students actually. So the class developed as part of the EU Shaping the Alpine region strategy, the EU Shaping Alps, they won a prize for the creation of biochar and a project that they're implementing at a school. So for those of you that aren't aware of what biochar is, they're going to explain a little bit about that and why they felt like it was important for the school and in particular the students to actually do something about about taking a lead on some of the climate action solutions. So Max and Sophia, thank you so much for joining us today. In terms of the amazing prize that you won first, congratulations. I think it's fantastic to see that we've got these local community solutions being developed, and a really big kudos to you and the team and your teacher Elke as well for pushing the school to actually be thinking of those. And I think that's amazing that you're able to sit here today and explain that. So what is biochar for those of us that don't know it? I think it would be great to hear a bit about that. And why do you think it's important that actually you can make some of these solutions local? We'd love to hear your perspective of that, both being from a younger generation and also being part of the school and the project that you've run.
Thank you. So basically, biochar is a material derived from damaged wood, which reduces CO2 in the atmosphere, and when planted into soil, it fertilizes the soil and makes the vegetables grow bigger and better. And if you want to know a little bit more, you can click on the QR code, which will link you to our video.
So the second question was how to make biochar locally. So well, we are currently facing climate change, and it is important to do something against it. I mean, I hope this is quite clear, and biochar helps us. And there are also other benefits, which Sophia already told us. And biochar also helps local farmers to produce better vegetables, more vegetables maybe, and so you can reduce routes of transport or transport use.
Amazing. And I think what's great in the solution that you're developing is that it's not only useful for the decarbonisation, it also then has this knock-on domino effect to the rest of stakeholders in the community. And I think just as a younger generation voice, it would be great to hear from you how has this been received at your school? Like, what's the feedback like been in the class? Because I know that a lot of your class is really engaged on this. So how did that come about? Did you kind of discuss together and say, look, we need to do something in the local community? What was the process like of the project? Because I think it's huge kudos that you've got this award, and it's great for us to share in that experience and hear how you found that.
So our teacher Elke actually told us about biochar, and we were all amazed by it. And then we read about the EUSALP, youth.shaping EUSALP competition, and then we entered and we won.
Yeah, and we are really happy about it, and it's quite amazing. And yeah, I think if you want to know more about biochar or our process, please watch the video, because then you get much information about the project and much more information about us.
It's amazing. And you know what I love about the video? I think the first time I saw it, I remember seeing there's a brilliant section, and I do really encourage you all to see this QR code and watch this video, because there's a section where you talk about the equivalent of the sequestration of Netflix watching. And I think that's just brilliant, because what you do in that is you make a subject which can seem quite abstract in terms of level of carbon in the atmosphere. You know, how do you measure that from a normal kind of citizen perspective if you're not a scientist? And then you've gone and said, well, actually, it's worth this much time on Netflix. And I love that, because I think what you're doing is you're making climate action accessible to people, not just of your own generation, or my generation, because I'm sadly a bit older than you, but also across multiple generations of people that can understand and associate with that issue. And I think that's just really fantastic from the communication side as well. I think one thing that came out in the SATI report that we created in January to feedback last year's projects was that people felt sometimes like climate action was this very far away, inaccessible thing. And I think from my side, I wanted to, throughout SATI, give people practical solutions and showcase innovators like yourselves that are actually on the ground tackling some of the challenges and showing that it is possible to actually make a difference at a local level. Climate change is obviously the biggest issue facing us in terms of systemically, from a biodiversity perspective, from a air pollution perspective, physical risk perspective, lots of different areas. But I think what you've done in this video in particular is show that something can be done at a local level, and it's something that people can associate with. And I really give you a lot of credit for that, because I think it's fantastic to see yourselves in the class doing things like this. And yeah, really would recommend you all to watch that. So this takes me really nicely actually onto Sabrina, because Sabrina is looking at a similar idea of action at a community level, but taking it slightly broader from a systems perspective. And Sabrina, I know that, so Sabrina and I, for background, we met actually at ISPO at the outdoor trade fair, and I think we've been going to this for quite a few years. And I remember going past their stall, and I thought, this is so cool. They had lots of leftover bits of materials, and they showed how actually that was turned into, I think it was a surfboard that you had there on the stand, Sabrina. I'm trying to remember, there was something really cool that was up on the stand, and I thought, that's amazing that you've got somebody that's willing to take waste and turn it into equally a higher value grade material in terms of the production process. And I think quite a few people that we've got on the call today, Sabrina, are from the outdoor industry and would probably be quite interested to hear your philosophy on that. But in terms of circular economy as a concept, it's obviously quite important for addressing this material waste issue that we have. And the recent data, I think, from the Circular Gap report showed that it's around close to 8 to 9% circular, the world is. So, you know, we've got a long way to go to move from a linear to circular economy, given that 90% of the world is not circular. So in the solution that you've developed at NewCycle, how are you tackling this through, for example, the concept of waste offsets, and in particular the idea of connecting conversion networks? I think it's really interesting for people to hear about.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I could talk about waste all day and how it's very directly related to the circular economy, or how the two are deeply connected. But I think before I kind of go into the nuts and bolts of how like the waste offset works, it would be helpful to give a little bit of a more of a background onto the problem that we're solving with NewCycle and how exactly we came to solving it this way. First of all, it's like our company, Nusa Sintara, has been designing and developing waste to value projects in problematic or hard to reach locations for the past 4 years. And even before that, our team has been working in different areas of the circular economy for the better part of a decade. And in this, or through this, all of our journeys, we realized, well, we came up across a lot of challenges during this time, which kind of formed the foundations of what NewCycle is standing on today. And there were 3 things in particular. The first thing that we saw was that the world's waste ends up in the worst places. And this is due to I'm just going to say, the dysfunctional way that our current global waste management system operates. You can look at the fact that nobody was really recycling for many decades and was actually, in fact, just sending their low value waste to China. Then China stopped taking that waste, and now where many countries, whether it's the UK or Germany or the United States, many countries are actually, in fact, just sending their waste to other parts of the world that are willing to take them. And that leads to the second, which is the social and environmental cost of a product is rarely, if ever, reflected into the cost of goods sold. And yet unintentional or intentional greenwashing is then thus a major contributor of pollution around the world. And what I mean by that is a lot of products are actually marketed as being recyclable, especially in packaging. But what isn't taken into consideration is that the place where this the end destination of this product, it doesn't necessarily mean that that country will be able to recycle that product, even if that product is recyclable. And which kind of leads to the final problem that we saw, that small scale and decentralized is what is needed in terms of waste management infrastructure, but is rarely, if ever, funded. And that's again a systemic problem that we currently have. And it was solving these 3 challenges which really inspired us to build NewCycle, which in short is a multi-stream waste offset service, which allows any individual or company to take responsibility for their waste impact, while simultaneously enabling waste negative technology around the world. well, basically in the parts of the world that need it the most. And we did this by, first of all, creating a tool which can diagnose the waste impact and the associated offset cost of any material, product, or process. This in turn can provide the resources to fund the development of the necessary network of small-scale and decentralized waste-to-value systems in the parts of the world that need them the most. And the end goal here is actually to develop a model of restoration where the waste is being taken out and transformed from the environment, where not only can value be put onto any waste stream, but one where the new materials which are being produced are then able to be put back into the production process to replace non-renewable resources. And to break it down, the new cycle kind of works in 4 stages. The first one is the assess, where we then help our partners or our clients choose a specific area of their business where they can have the greatest impact to start out. And then that might be a material stream or a product or a certain process. And once this diagnostic is complete, then the next stage is offset, where we're able to give our customers their unique offset fee. And with our carefully vetted network of conversion partner technology, we can guarantee the extraction and conversion of that amount and type of waste from the environment in a high impact region. And what's been really exciting for many of the companies that we're working with is that the amount per product is actually quite low. So it's something that can be really, really easily integrated in the cost of goods sold for the end customer without affecting the buying, like the buying choice. It might be a fraction of a cent for something like a shampoo bottle, or around €1 for a higher value good if it's something, but it's usually has almost always been under 1% of the total cost of the product sold. And then that leads to transform, because it's really important that we are able to guarantee the integrity of our conversion projects. And we do this through our certificate system, which ensures the transparency of all of these projects, guaranteeing that our customers' offset will be contributing to specified waste conversion projects with a certain outcome and impact. And we currently have 5 waste-to-value partners operating in 10+ countries that have the ability to transform nearly any waste stream into new valuable products. And the new valuable products is key, and because this allows it to not just reverse the waste impact, but also create sustained economic value for the community, ensuring both the growth and the scalability. And finally, restore, because at the end of the day, the motivation behind New Cycle is not only to see these amazing technologies, biochar, for example, is one of them, which are currently solving our biggest waste challenges, implemented in the parts of the world that need them the most, but also to ensure that the new materials which are being developed are able to replace the non-renewable materials in the production process. And to give a tangible example, like you mentioned from our meeting, one of the leading board producers, after we did the waste impact assessment, we discovered not only that they could offset the waste impact of one of their products for under €1 per board, but that they could also integrate a bio-based non-toxic epoxy, which is developed from one of our other conversion partners, into their production, making it an even more sustainable product. So I know I covered a lot of information in a short period of time.
It's a wealth of knowledge, honestly. I think what's fascinating in everything that you say is there's a lot of common levers that companies are not necessarily thinking about that are actually useful for them to integrate into the way they think of circular economy. And by this, I mean that point around the economics of circularity at a product level is really misunderstood. I think a lot of the discussions that I have with outdoor brands, they say, oh, you know, but actually we can't reuse this in our own supply chain, it's much more expensive. But the way they're thinking of circularity is so limited. They're thinking of it in with regards to their own supply chain only, and not actually thinking about the whole life cycle of that waste. And I think in what you're doing at New Cycle, you're really at the forefront of trying to reimagine that journey of what it is that a company actually has to take responsibility for when it comes to waste. Not so they turn around and say, right, 30% of this fleece is made of recycled materials. Whenever they say that, I turn around and say, what about the other 70%? And what are you doing to mitigate that in this current moment of transition? And for me, that word of transition is so critical, because often the dialogue, and it's not just for circularity, it's also for energy, it's also for carbon, it's for biodiversity. We're in a transition, and therefore I don't think we can necessarily go straight to zero, obviously, in terms of the waste that they have. Therefore, I think the technologies that you're developing are so critical in that journey of trying to actually be the most responsible company they can be, both from a materials management perspective, but then broadly the knock-on effect on other communities that they operate in, I think is very, very critical. And that word of transition is so key. And in everything that we've talked about today, actually, all of the speakers are at the forefront of those transition technologies. I think it's got to be a collaborative process, though, when we look at this across the supply chain. I think in what you just said, Sabrina, as well, it's very clear that some of those conversion partners may not be people that that company even knows, right? So I think that's where what you're doing is so vital in connecting some of those networks that actually have the waste and those where they need to take responsibility for that. And I think that connection between the two is so important for being a lever to address transition technologies in particular. So this takes me really nicely actually onto a quick kind of summary question for all of our speakers before we move to the Q&A. I would again encourage you all to please put questions in the chat function for our speakers today, and we'll be covering those in around 5 minutes. So very quick round table. I know this is quite hard, but in 1 quick minute. So if we were to have this dialogue in 2022, hopefully we won't all still be stuck at home in 2022, but never mind. What is it that you'd actually like to see that's changed when we're having this discussion in terms of the transition discussion and the discussion around different networks engaging? So I'll pose this first to Nikolas, I think. In the energy space, what would you want to see that's changed in a year's time in terms of the scale up or some of the challenges that you'd like to have been addressed at that point?
Well, what would I have changed? Actually, what I would have changed, that's exactly what we are working with in our project. So we are following different projects regarding the transition of the energy system, and I would like these projects to succeed, and I guess that would already make an impact and enable follow-up projects based on what we did there. So the success of what we are doing at the moment, that's what I'm hoping and looking forward to.
Great. And I think especially on hydrogen, that's quite an interesting thing to solve, really, because it's so interconnected in terms of the different players on the value chain. I know that on the finance side, we're looking quite a lot at that discussion around how finance can support the scale up of hydrogen technologies. But I think, again, like you said, there's lots of things that we can address over the next year to look at that. And I guess this takes me to Anselma from a quick closing question perspective. What is it that you'd like to see that's really scaled up over the next year, and some of the challenges? I think the policy side, the connected stakeholders you mentioned are really interesting. I think in a dream world, what would it be if we were having this discussion in a year?
Yeah, in our case, it's pretty clear. We would have energy data from smart meters for every single household and every single producing entity. I think that's a first step we need to take in the energy sector to truly become green, because in order to manage distributed resources, we need to know how they do, so we need data about them. So for sure, smart metering infrastructure and energy data available everywhere.
Amazing. I think that's very helpful for people in the energy space that are on this call to hear as well. And I guess Sophia and Max, from the perspective of the younger generation, what is it in a year's time that you'd like to see changed? Is it kind of more that there's community engagement that you want companies to step up? As a younger person, what is it that you think needs to really shift in the next year?
Well, to compensate the CO2 emissions, they can use biochar, as we already told you, and to get clearer conscience. So in other words, they should use to compensate the CO2. And I think as an e.g. as a transport company, for you, it would be very good if you use biochar, because then you reduce the biochar, the CO2, sorry, that you like put in the atmosphere. And hopefully if we talk in 2022, so we have I don't know, a solution from the side of the politics. So we need some laws, I think, for the climate, and hopefully we can see that in 22, because yeah, it's a big problem, climate change, and we all know, but nobody really do something against it. And with biochar, it's so easy, and I think it would be a great opportunity to use biochar and reduce your CO2 and maybe get our better or old world back, hopefully.
And I think it's important in what you say about that policy discussion, because obviously going into November, there's a big climate change conference, COP26, that you might be aware of. And I think at that, people will be looking at governments to step up and make renewed and more ambitious commitments. But also, I think that what's really great is that there'll be a discussion around the solutions that are required. And I think at a community level, it's really interesting that you guys are doing that adaptation and mitigation in terms of with biochar. And then last but by no means least, Sabrina, in terms of from your perspective, what is it in a year's time that you'd like to have shifted really in terms of the space around circularity, and in particular companies really stepping up and taking a bit more ambitious leadership on this issue?
I guess it's both in a way, like less and more. Because this is something that we are really trying to solve, is to make that first step as easy as possible. So you don't need to like offset the impact, whether it's CO2 or waste, like in one stage, but it's like that, it's like, you know, it's going to be the journey of 1,000 footsteps, and to help make that initial step as easy as possible. And so then they can see what their feedback is. They can see what the impact, their response from their customers, which in turn also I would like to see in a way a breaking down a little bit of the silos, because that's part of the reason why they're like, well, I don't make my own products. My products are like within the supply chain. The company that's doing it is actually outsourcing 5 other different companies. And to create a better model of communication and accountability between these, and then also within the customer. It's like one of our biggest challenges that we're facing is that nobody knows what's happened to the waste. It's whether it's an individual or a government, it's just this big ambiguous cloud, in which is why it ends up as an island in the middle of the ocean. And to kind of like break down these barriers between industries, whether it's like energy and waste, they have a lot more to do with each other than people initially realize. And especially into the end consumer, to make these areas a lot more digestible and understandable for the layman, the better it's going to be. When it is mystified, people don't act on it. People don't like feeling like they're stupid. So I think it needs to be made like as easy as possible for people to get involved, or else it's also what makes people get kind of duped by greenwashing. Is they just want to do something, and so they're uneducated about it. So they just kind of like buy the first pack that they see with an eco label on it without actually knowing what that means. So,
and I think that point around the information gap is really important. I think one thing that was quite interesting when I did my research on circular economy was that there's over 100 definitions, even within academia, of what circular economy is. And so even if we can't understand that from a research perspective, how are we going to get the general public and companies and CEOs and communities to actually engage on this? I think it requires a real bottom-up approach, and actually a lot of people on this call are looking at quite local solutions around circular economy. And I think in the breakout sessions we'll be connecting, hopefully, each of you to people that you're interested in collaborating with on some of these challenges. In terms of the Q&A, I can see we've got a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm going to briefly pose those. Do keep them coming in the chat, and we'll try to address those in the next 5 minutes or so. I think, Nikolas, there's a question for you from Alois, and I know, Alois, you're also based in Austria, I believe, as well, in Salzburg land. And the question that Alois is asking is, in terms of the hydrogen technologies, how do you actually assess the potentially lower efficiency of the current technologies in the hydrogen space in terms of how we can actually implement that and expand renewable energy generation? And so kind of as an ancillary question, could reaching the 100% renewable energy target potentially be at risk given the increase in hydrogen use? I mean, I personally am looking a lot at the green hydrogen space, which the two go very hand in hand. But I guess, Nikolas, it would be quite interesting to hear your perspective around some of those trade-offs that we're currently seeing and how you can see a pathway forward to resolve some of those.
Thank you for the question, Alois. Well, regarding the efficiency, that's always something that is tackled, which is perhaps also overestimated in the general problem. So our perspective or our goal is the reconstruction of the energy system to electricity. So we want to get rid of oil, coal, and gas and reconstruct it using electricity. That's the first main goal. And as I explained, with electricity, we have the problem that it needs to be produced as we need it, and this power on demand issue is a really expensive one. So there is a rough estimation, 2/3 of the energy price is just for this power on demand, and one third of the energy price is the real energy. So this problem that it needs to be generated at the same time is a huge one, and that's why we also looked for technologies where we can store high quantities. So it's not just about to move energy from day to night, where of course battery electric systems work perfectly, but it's more about storing energy over days to months and even seasons. That's the greater goal here. And so our look on this is simply how can we accomplish this reconstruction, and we cannot accomplish it if we don't have this tool of mass energy storage, and that's why hydrogen comes in. So, and the second thing is, of course, efficiency. If you just look on, okay, you use electricity, you get hydrogen, perhaps you once again make electricity, this efficiency is not so high. But of course, we always try to make use of all the energy in meta streams. So we use our hydrogen recipe, we call it. So we put in, we need water, we need electricity, and what do we get out? We get out heat we can use for other purposes. We get out hydrogen, of course we can use that one. We get out oxygen that can also be used, and if you are looking on the whole chain and use all the parts, also energy efficiency is really high. So this discussion regarding the efficiency is just always something, taking a look at something very small, and also not tackling the problem that the sun is shining at the day and at night not, and also in the winter we have not enough energy, but in the summer we have too much. So it's more complex. And regarding this question, conversion of the whole energy system, 100%. Well, our goal, you saw, there is an overall goal, an overall strategy, but we always try to make one step at a time, and thoughts where you say, okay, how would it be if tomorrow is everything different? that's something which really can kill quite anything you do. So our approach is to make the steps to just set up these projects, and when they are done, we of course will see what worked great, what didn't, and then set the next step. That's our approach.
And I think what's good about your approach is it really does seem very pragmatic. So you do look at quite a step-by-step process of trying to assess, especially when you have innovation. I think you have to take that pragmatism. I think it's a balance of the two, right? You have the vision of what you're trying to achieve, and then you have the pragmatism. I think there's some great research out there around the experimentation in some of the circular and sustainable innovation dialogues, really, both at startup level, large corporates, and within academia. And I think this pragmatism is definitely important, and I think it's got to be balanced with some of the vision of what the end outcome looks like, and then the two bridged together are really important. I think we had a question from Jim, and it's more of an observation, I guess, for Sabrina around some of the challenges of companies that might use waste offset as a default to not necessarily reduce their own waste in the system. And I know in the discussions that we've had, Sabrina, we're looking at how is it possible that you could have an equivalent in terms of the transparency that's required in a waste offset that currently maybe doesn't actually occur in a carbon offset. So I don't know if you want to quickly address that for a minute before we move to the breakouts, but I guess that's where your own approach of measuring the waste probably becomes quite important, because you've got a very transparent system to actually do that.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think I have the same, I'm also not a fan of carbon offsets. I think there's not enough standardization. They're very vague. And it leaves people with this feeling that they can continue doing what they're doing, when in fact, often it's like, if you look at the tree planting example, those projects won't mature for 20, sometimes even up to 40 years. And that's not okay in terms of actually as a solution for mitigating climate change, if you look at the timeline that we have right now. And I think that what we are also able to do that's very different in terms of the waste, it's like when you get a waste impact assessment, we are just automatically analyzing the types of materials that are going into a person's production, their logistics, the actual materials that are being used in the bag, all of these things. So then we basically have a roster or a bill of materials, so we know exactly which materials could potentially then be switched out for more sustainable ones. And that's what makes I don't necessarily see carbon offsetting as a circular solution, whereas the waste offsetting is something, it's about building circularity into your processes from the beginning. And yeah, the last thing is that as opposed to the 20 to 40 years down the line, all of these projects, the moment that they're initiated, they're taking waste out of the environment, and they're valuable projects. So they're generating money, which then allows them to scale. So you get this kind of knock-on effect that each project then can then lead to more projects. And so it's a lot. Yeah, well, thanks for the observation, Jim. I appreciate that you noticed the difference between the two, but I hope that elaborated even more and gave you more confidence that we're not like carbon offsetting.
And I think I'd encourage you to connect with Sabrina after Jim, and definitely keep that dialogue going. Talking of connections, so we're going to go into the breakout sessions, and I'm going to quickly hand over to Maria and Josine in terms of a quick hello and a welcome. I know that I sort of introduced them at the start, but it's worth seeing who they are, and they'll be leading the breakout sessions, and I'll be in a third one as well. Just in terms of the background behind those breakout sessions, we're going to be addressing a couple of different issues there. We're going to be talking about the challenges that you see in terms of facing some of the scale up of the climate solutions that we've talked about. We'll also be covering the role of the community in developing some of these solutions, and finally addressing a little bit of the implementation of innovation in terms of R&D and where there are potential hurdles in that process, because the whole point from my perspective of SATI is to be able to feed that back to the people that can actually address this and make a difference. So I guess Maria and Josine, I'm going to quickly hand over for a hello intro from you guys, and then we're going to move into the breakout sessions in a moment. Maria, do you want to pick up?
Yeah, I see that I'm unmuted, so I can go first. Hey everyone, my name's Maria. I'm an architect and I'm a snowboarder. I'm actually still in my gear now. I just finished some filming behind me, in a zone behind me. And I'm really looking forward to the breakout sessions. We've got some super interesting people in the panel and some really interesting things to talk about. The 3 questions are going to generate a lot of discussion, and I'm just keen to get everyone connected and involved, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Amazing, thank you. And I think we're all very excited about the new film as well. I think hopefully we'll be sharing it on the SATI channel soon. So I think you guys are doing an amazing job at empowering women in sport as well, and that's a critical part of sustainability too. I think it's not just environmental sustainability, right? Like the SDGs tackle multiple issues, including social and gender equality. So yeah, I think we'll be covering that at some point in the next year. So do watch that space as well on top. And Josine, just a quick intro to you as well. It'd be great for people to see you and meet you before the breakout.
Sure. Well, thanks a lot, Maria, for already introducing what we're about to start with. So that's not on me anymore. But yeah, my name is Josine, originally from the Netherlands, but based in the French Alps. And I call myself a community architect, which means like I love to look at things from a community perspective and how can you create a sense of belonging. I think that's one of the most important things in order to drive innovation forward, just to give everyone a voice and a space and a feeling to do so. So yeah, in that regard, looking very much forward to the conversation. And I would say, let's make sure to always keep our webcams and our microphones on in case we're not finding ourselves in any loud environments, because that's how we can truly get the conversation going. And thanks a lot, Sarisha and team, for facilitating this great momentum.
Amazing. And I know that you've been an amazing source of energy for me personally as well in this process. I think both you and Maria, in terms of encouraging the project, and big thank you for that as well over the last year. So I think we're going to open the breakout sessions now. Del enjoyed your breakout sessions. I know I had a fascinating time in the one that we were doing, and lots of different discussion topics coming up. I'm going to hand over actually to Josine to give a bit of reflection on what was interesting in your session, and I'm conscious that we've probably got about 5 minutes of reflection time. So I think, yeah, feel free to give a quick kind of 2-minute overview, and then I'll pass over to Maria as well for the same.
Okay, I think first of all, a big shout out to Sarisha, Danny, and the whole team, because the conversation was amazing, the diversity of the people. So I have my hands together. It was an amazing conversation. The biggest takeaways is when it comes to, for instance, to scaling the solutions. One thing that we noticed is that there's just a lot of differences between the people around the world, differences in culture, and it's something that you need to embrace. But how can you really define key messages that are applicable in all sorts of riches, and that then potentially a multidisciplinary group of people locally can take on? So this was where most of our discussion on question 1 was focused on, the translation of messages and the embracement of diversity. In question 2, when it comes to, for instance, best practices and insight on community bottom-up development, we saw, for instance, how in Chamonix, the municipality of the villages are very much engaged in assessing roof quality and providing opportunities to place solar panels, and how, for instance, in Switzerland, there are many initiatives where energy companies are engaged in really creating community bottom-up initiatives in order to source energy. So there the conversation was centered on. And then when it comes to question 3, the biggest insights were that it's very important to create more platforms where solutions are showcased. So thumbs up for SATI, because you're doing an amazing job there. And then another thing, what is very important for the adaptation or the adoption of solutions, is to make the benefit clear for people. What is in it for me? And then another thing as well is to make something actually already familiar to someone. So for instance, Max and Sophie, they mentioned, hey, you got a plan behind you, you can use a product there. Easy peasy. So yeah, amazing insights. Thanks so much for my room.
And thank you so much for leading that. I think everything that you've said resonates really strongly in terms of the levers that we need to try to implement. I think the municipality engagement's a really interesting example, and I think it'd be great to follow up on that actually with you afterwards to hear a bit more on that. I think the platforms for solutions is so critical. I think so often the climate dialogue is really negative in this space, and I think talking about the solutions is really important. I'm going to hand over to Maria to give a bit of an update from your group as well, and then I'll just finish off the session with a quick word at the end.
Thank you, Sarisha. Yeah, we had an amazing discussion. We kind of bounced between all of the questions because everyone was so excited about, you know, the momentum of the discussion. I guess for the first question, it was like based on the challenges that we face in scaling up. There was a lot of discussion around, like, we were talking about the textile industry, for example, because we said that the energy industry, there's a lot of momentum there. So but in regards to the textile industry, it's a problem. There's many complex factors around it, but it is also at the other end exciting because there's such a strong direct line between the consumer and the product, right? So there's a lot of potential there. And basically, in regards to challenges and that consumer connection, the consumers are confused. So we were basically talking about anti-fashion and the role of the influencer, and how that could be a way we could really scale up the influence of the consumer decision. And then we were talking about in regards to getting the community more involved. Anselma had a lot of really interesting insights regarding application software and transparency regarding, like, you know, if the community is more involved in their product and waste, and just, you know, are able to compare their consumerism with the people beside them or the community or even globally, if there's more of a transparency, then there is less of a mystification around what their actual purchase choices are doing, like the impact of their purchase choices. I could keep going on, but I'll stop there. It was a great discussion. Thank you so much. The fact that the lab session was longer was a really, really positive thing. So thank you for extending that breakout session time.
I'm glad. I'm very glad. Yeah. I think it's always, we could probably always talk for another hour, all of us in those sessions, for sure. I think that what's interesting is the difference in the perspectives in the two sessions. I think that point about influencers is very interesting because it goes to this idea of how to communicate about sustainability effectively and do that in a way which changes behavior. And that brings me very nicely to a little bit of an overview of the session that I led on looking at the same sort of things, but behavior change was definitely flagged as a key thing that needs to happen. I think the idea of behavior change was also saying that actually we have to question some of the consumption choices. So rather than just saying, right, let's switch to an electric car, it becomes a question of, do I even need a car? Could we car share? Could I take a bicycle? Could I take public transport? It's about these kinds of substitution choices when it comes to sustainability. I think there was a very big point around community and knowledge facilitators. So for example, we had a couple of people that shared about knowledge networks in Italy and also in Austria that are really trying to bring different experts together and then engage that dialogue with the community. So the community feels like they have an understanding of what they can actually do. So at a very grassroots level, I think that's going to be a thing that moves the needle a lot more quickly. And finally, I think regulation was flagged as well as quite critical in terms of some of those big industries shifting and also facilitating some of the technology transfer that currently might not occur. So I'm very conscious that we're overrun slightly, so I wanted to give a big thank you to everyone for joining today, including all of our speakers and facilitators and the audience. I think it's been such a fascinating discussion. I'm always quite sad when the session's finished because I think we could talk all day and continue this narrative. But the one thing I would say is, given that obviously circumstances are quite difficult with the pandemic at the moment, I think this solidarity of us all coming together in a session like this is really valuable. And I thank you all so much for being part of that. And just a quick note note on the next session. So the next one we have will be at the end of April, and we'll be looking at results of the future, where we'll be tackling a lot of issues, including the idea of health tourism, looking at how we can actually scale up decarbonisation of resorts, looking at localization within a resort too, and taking a bit more of a pragmatic approach to the design of resorts in the future. And then the other sessions I'll be updating on the SATI channels in the coming months. The one thing I would say is please do stay tuned on LinkedIn and join the group. I'll just put the quick code here to join the LinkedIn group. I think I'd encourage you all to please join that group, connect together, keep the dialogue going. We'll be uploading, I think, later on this evening or tomorrow morning, depends how long my work day is. We'll be uploading a clip of this whole session, and do feel free to share that. I'll also be giving a bit of the reflections and highlights in that as well. So I'll put that on the LinkedIn group. Please connect, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or you want to be connected to anybody that you spoke to today. I'm happy to try to facilitate that and do any e-intros as well. So thank you so much everyone for joining, and really do appreciate that a lot. I think it's been such a fascinating afternoon.
Thank you, Sarisha.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a nice day, you all.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
It was great.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.